Hey guys, it's Packy from the house, and we got a review from my guy Jeremy, who's a two-hander, and we're going to give him some tips, including how to create a slide to bowl more strikes. So let's get into it. All right, so today's review, we are going to go over Jeremy's game. He's a two-hander. He said he's fairly new to the game, and he's looking for some tips and some advice that I can give him to help get his ball speed up and help him with his balance. So those are already two things that you know from right now that I'm going to talk about for the majority of this video. And one thing I would like to compliment him on is obviously he's got a great haircut. You can see here, pretty fresh cut. But besides that, on a more serious note, something I would compliment him on, he's out here. I see the Dougie Vision logo. He's bowling an action match. He's getting some competition reps, which in my mind is always the best way to learn. So out of any way that you can learn, going and truly just testing yourself in competition is the best way to see, okay, whatever I've practiced on, is it working? Is it something that I can, is it something that I need to continue working on, or did I do really well and do I need to work on something new? So that's just something that I see, and I always like to see from the guys that I help coach, from even some of my friends out at Wichita State who go bowl tournaments. Anybody who goes and bowls tournaments, if you don't come away with something that you can learn or something that you need to work on, that's basically what I look for when I go bowl these smaller amateur tournaments. And I see Jeremy here testing his game out, seeing what he's practiced, if it works, and now he's reaching out to us to try and help him with some of those things that he noticed he needs to work on. So the very first thing would be his timing for me. And you can only clip it, and I'm not sure if he uses a 5-step or a 4-step approach, but I can see right here in the very beginning, and it's a little hard for you, but once that right foot starts to move, if it's a 4-step approach, once that right foot starts to move, if you're a righty, the ball, I've talked about this before, the ball should already start to be pushed away. And you can see right here it hasn't moved, and it doesn't really move up until that third step right here. You can see that third step, third step's pretty much already out there, and now the ball is out there where, he's almost a step late on his approach, and something that he can, maybe this would help him improve his balance if he gets a little better timing. Just as you can see here, his foot's planted and the ball is pretty much all the way on the way down, ready to be delivered. But since he doesn't have a slide, his ball is very late. He's basically in the middle of his backswing where it's at the top, almost, right here. It should be close to being down, and you see, he's about a half step or almost a whole step late, and it causes him to kind of jump at the line, possibly with some other factors that we're going to talk about. But yeah, so for starters, I would say the push away just needs to be, a step earlier or even a half step earlier to make him feel a little more comfortable. But the biggest thing, I noticed the knee brace, the biggest thing, and I've talked to him a little bit about this before, would be just implementing a slide. So I think a slide is really important for helping your balance and your shot consistency. So maybe take a little further step back on the approach, step back a little further when you're in your starting position. That way you're starting this power hop step from here, and you can use a little slide. You can get a little better knee bend at the line where you're not fully sticking. And as you can see, you're basically up on your toes right here, really over the top. But if you can implement, and it doesn't have to be a large slide, but it just has to be a little bit of, not heel toe, but toe into the heel at the foul line. That way we can create a little more consistency off of your hand. And with this slide, you can actually create more power. So I talked about it in the beginning of the video, and I'll talk about it again now. He said he needed to improve his ball speed, and he felt like he just throws it a little bit slow. And I noticed, the arm swing is pretty high, which isn't a big deal, but that's not the way to create ball speed. Whereas, his ball speed's not terribly slow, but it is on the slower side for how much revs he has and how much rev rate he has. So I would just say try and implement a slide, step a little further back on the approach. That way you can create some ball speed. And my tip to you would be, get a slide sole. I see you have, some nice bowling shoes where you have the interchangeable soles. But Something I would say to try and implement, work on it from 3 steps or from 1 step where you just take a slide and throw the ball really slow just to get used to that slide. I would never suggest someone going from plant to slide to just go straight into an entire full approach with a slide sole when they were just using the regular rubber sole on that slide foot. So my tip to you would be, start from 3 steps with that slide sole, and this is something you can practice your balance on. Another tip, now instead of speed, we're going to switch over to balance. Another tip for your balance is, you're in this great position right here where your back is in line. You got that deep knee bend, which I love to see. Knee bend, I think, is huge when it comes to balance. So the deeper you can get that knee bend and the more upright that your spine can be. So I think this spine tilt right here is perfect. But the problem is if we rewind it, a second or two, I notice you dip down pretty low, which is okay, but then you pop up pretty hard as you release the ball. You kind of hit up on it and you use your back. My suggestion would be to take this spine tilt that you have here, right here, and try and maintain this. Try not to dip too much further down from this spine tilt that we got here. This is almost perfect, and I think if you can come in and maintain this the whole way through, it's something I work on still to this day. If I can almost envision as I'm going through my approach, if I can envision my chest facing the pins or my chest being up a little bit more towards the pins, then I can, make sure I don't dip too low. Like this isn't terribly low, but I would say it's a little too low. And if you can just, make it a little higher up, maybe like this, and just have it maintain instead of you pop up to this good spine tilt that you have. You maintain it all the way through up until that very last release point. And I think if we can just fix that a little bit, pull that spine up just a little bit so it can maintain that throughout. I think this again will help you create more power, as well as implementing that slide will help you create more speed off your hand and more consistency from one shot to the next. So that's something that I think you can improve on. And you have great spine tilt throughout. It's just that little dip upon release. And I see it in a lot of two-handers, especially guys who are new to the two-handed game. They think it's all about throwing it with their back, which I think could lead to long-term problems. But again, I think you have great spine tilt, and it's just this little fix. And this is another thing that can be fixed in a 3-step drill or a, 1 step where you're just sliding at the line, making sure your chest is facing the pins a little more, or making sure your slide and your knee bend stays consistent throughout instead of popping up or falling off. So with that slide, one thing I will say is you really want to make sure that your hips are it's kind of like you're sitting back on your heel or sitting back a little further, like you're in a chair or you're in a lunge, instead of you're trying to release the ball forward. A lot of people get too far out in front of them, and I think that can create a little bit of off balance where you're right here, you're kind of like Sean Maldonado, and you just hop a little bit to the side, which if it's the same every time, great, but I would never suggest that because I think it's so hard to repeat. Whereas if you can just sit back on it a little more and not be so, like right now, if I had to point to your weight, it would be this way and over here. So you're out in front and you're off to the side, which you can see makes your foot hop exactly those two directions. You're kind of off in front of you and to the right with that hop. And I think, that's another thing that you can improve on with a 3-step drill or a 1-step drill with that slide sole on the bottom. And I think a lot of it just comes, don't rush it when I give you these things to fix. Try to implement them, maybe just walk and take 10 steps up to the line and go really, really slow, and make sure you have that timing with the push away and you have that balance down at the line before you try and go fixing everything at once. Try and do the 3-step and say, for this game, for game 1 of practice, I'm going to focus on my approach. And I'm going to focus on getting that push away at the right time. And then the second game of practice today, I'm going to focus on my chest facing the pins. And then game 3, I'm going to stick on that slide sole and make sure it's really good. And then just repeat the same thing where, you're focusing on one thing at a time instead of listening to these 3 things with the slide sole, the balance, and the push away, don't try and put them all together at once. Maybe, maybe in your third practice session, try and put two of them together where you get that slide down. Or maybe you work on the slide for a whole practice session and you feel like you get it down, and then you move on to, okay, now I'm ready to work on my spine tilt. And then the very last, the third practice session you go to, you're like, okay, let me try and get that push away in the right spot. And I will say, out of these three things, the spine tilt is probably going to be the easiest, and then the slide sole, and then the push away and the timing is going to be probably the hardest, and it's going to need the most work, but it's not something you can't do with practice. I think with practice and your foundation, you can really go anywhere you want. You can, bowl bigger tournaments, take it really wherever you want to go to, as long as you put in the time. And I see you are out here testing yourself, which is awesome. So again, thanks for sending it in. Really appreciate it. And you got a great foundation. You got a great community over here in New Jersey where, a lot of good bowlers, a lot of guys you can learn from and ask questions to, along with us here. So thanks for sending it in, and we really appreciate it. Thanks for sticking around and watching the whole thing, guys. Hope you guys all learned something. And as always, down in the description below, you can click the link for a 50% discount on a coaching review of your own from one of us house pros.